That's good.
Yes, now we are.
Yes.
I'm Pam Rogers, mother of 4, and my eldest son, Christopher, was born with congenital CMV. I am here today and so excited to be talking to Valerie Sung. Valerie, just before we get started, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Valerie. I'm a paediatrician in Melbourne. I work in several roles. I see children who are deaf and hard of hearing, and I also do a lot of research in trying to make sure these children get to their full developmental potentials. So I also work through the Royal Children's Hospital and the Murdoch Children's Research Institute.
Beautiful, thank you. So before we jump into all of the wonderful things and amazing work that you're doing, I'm going to ask you some quick rapid fire questions to get to know you a little better. What's your idea of a perfect Sunday afternoon?
Oh, that one. Oh, sleep in for sure. Sleep in with no children around.
Yes, it's like a unicorn, isn't it? Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl for sure.
Yeah, nice. And what's your favorite food?
Asian, anything Asian. Sorry. You know, I do have an Asian background and yeah, I can't get off Asian food.
Yeah, it is pretty good. Okay, so launching into why we're here today, would you be able to give us a bit of a brief overview of like your career journey and what's led you to working in the space of looking at CMV?
All right. Well, as I said, I'm a pediatrician. I've always been interested in, seeing how I can make things better for children and families. And in about 2016, I was very privileged to be able to set up a clinical service for deaf and hard of hearing children. And from there, I've partnered with several people at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and have formed a hearing or deafness research program. So our research program has been a backbone of working with a project called VicCHILD, which is the Victorian Childhood Hearing Longitudinal Databank. And our work has really been trying to capture how children grow and develop over time if they are diagnosed with a hearing loss when they're young. And then as part of that, all this information about CMV has come through in terms of one of the potentially preventable causes of hearing loss progression. And seeing that as a major kind of upcoming issue, I guess we've kind of looked into whether we can bring about targeted screening, which is identifying CMV early in their newborn period so that we can catch that time period of giving an accurate diagnosis to enable these children, I guess, to reach their, the best treatment possible and best interventions possible. And so a few years back, one of my PhD students, Emma Webb, piloted a targeted screening program through our Victorian infant hearing screening program. And we found that it was really feasible for parents to take a saliva swab from their babies at birth. And these samples were able to get to the lab in time so that they could get to see the infectious diseases physicians in time if they had a diagnosis of CMV. And then from that, I guess the other question was, apart from targeted screening, which still needs a lot of work in terms of implementation and scaling up, there's also a lot of talk about universal screening. So that means screening every single baby born for CMV. So I kind of felt that, that's an area that really needs more research because we actually don't know how common CMV is in Australia. So to be able to understand that is really, really important before we consider rolling out any kind of screening programs. So that's kind of led me, I guess, to this big research project that's partnering with a research program called GenV or Generation Victoria. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Thank you so much for sharing that journey so far. So you just mentioned at the end there the GenV project. So I understand that part of your study, the Screen cCMV project, is part of the larger GenV project. Would you like to just give us a bit of an overview and tell us what GenV is?
Yeah, so GenV is a statewide research program that occurred from October 2021 to October 2023. So during this time period, every single baby born in Victoria and their families were invited to join GenV. And the aim of GenV is to paint a picture of how children grow and develop, how people age, and how health changes across generations. And so as part of this, we now have about more than 100,000 families or the individuals, so parents and babies involved in GenV. And when these families joined, many of these families allowed their baby saliva to be collected. So we have, more than 30,000 saliva samples that we are intending to analyze to test for CMV to see whether we can answer the research question of how common CMV is in our community. And the more important thing is not just how common it is, but what happens to these babies over time. So as many of you will know, CMV can be asymptomatic, which means that at birth, you may have absolutely no symptoms from it. And in fact, the majority of babies who have CMV at birth may not have any problems later on in life. And it's only a proportion of children who do. So we really do want to understand what happens to these children if they do have CMV detected early on in life. If they were, for example, offered different kinds of treatments or interventions, what happens to them later on in life? In particular, when we don't have enough, I guess, research around whether giving babies with, for example, hearing loss by itself, whether these babies benefit from treatment, we actually don't know still. So I think these are just really important questions that we need to answer to be able to, offer families a really accurate picture of what happens if their child has CMV.
So good. It's so exciting that like a project of this size is shining light on CMV and asking these really important questions that so many families in our community want to know the answers to. So we've kind of covered a few of the aims of your research in terms of trying to find out, how the treatment works and how effective it is for these children. Where is your study up to?
Well, we're about to analyze the saliva samples. It's been a long, long journey. And yes, it should be, in the next 6 months that we complete that analysis. And we're partnering with the Victorian Infectious Diseases Reference Laboratory to do that. And we hope that by middle of next year, we'll have some information at least on how common CMV is. One thing to note, though, is that the babies who were recruited actually were all born during the COVID period. And as many of you know, Victoria went under strict lockdown rules during that period of time. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens to the results, whether that might be lower than we expected or not. But in any case, that's kind of how we're hoping that we'll find out by the middle of next year. And then in terms of kind of outcomes, in terms of, how children progress over time, we will, have some information about their developmental progress, but probably not all complete information in the next few years. So we do need to wait longer for these children to grow up. We are hoping that we will be successful in applying for more funding for GenV to collect, kind of outcomes data when the children go to school. So, for example, that would be a really good time to see how these children are going, and we might have, more information on, how they're going at that stage. But that will be quite a few years down the track, but that's kind of the plan at the moment.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so we've kind of covered where your study's up to and what you're aiming to achieve. What do you think the implications of these findings are for not just researchers, but for families and clinicians in the future?
Well, at the moment, number one, families don't have access to early detection of CMV on a kind of a systematic kind of level. So, it kind of depends on where the baby is born, whether they may be offered a CMV test. So I think the first implication is making the test available to babies who should have that test. And I guess this research is trying to address that. So that's number one in terms of access to the testing. Number two, I guess, is to provide more information for families about what to expect for their child if they do have CMV at birth. And I think this will be a question that will be extremely helpful if we can look at what are the factors that really predict, I think, outcomes or the future of the child. So, for example, GenV will have in the future the possibility of, looking at other factors like, genetics or, environment or, other family factors. So, what are the things that, predict, outcomes for these children so that we know what to do with them when they do have a diagnosis of CMV at the start.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today, Valerie. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. It's been so informative. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge so generously with everyone who's listening. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.